Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're in a different time zone. My name is Mary Sabatino, and I'm the Vice President and Partner at Galerie Lelong Co. in New York. And I would like to welcome you to our 13th conversation in the series Galerie Lelong Dialogues. Today's conversation is held on the occasion of our group exhibition, Open Doors, which is an invitational exhibition presenting works by artists from Welancora Gallery and Luis de Jesus Gallery in Los Angeles. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank my two collaborators in this, Ivy Jones from Welancora and Luis de Jesus from Luis de Jesus Gallery for their generous collaboration, as well as, of course, the artists. Through August 5th, we are presenting works by Carl Hazlewood, June Edmonds, Helen Evans Ramsaran, and Chris Watts. And today, I'm honored to have Daonne Huff moderate our discussion. A full bio is available on our website, but to briefly introduce her, Daonne is an arts administrator, a performance-centered artist, a curator, and a poet who was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. She is Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Studio Museum in Harlem. For more than 15 years, she has worked with institutions and focused on working with not-for-profits dedicated to increasing arts accessibility to a wider and more diversified audience. She holds a BA in Art History from Vassar College and an MA in Visual Arts Administration with a not-for-profit concentration from New York University. Having devoted the bulk of her adult life to helping other artists and in arts administration, she has found her way back to artistic practice, performing and exhibiting at venues including Welancora Gallery and the Whitney Museum of American Art. So thank you for joining us. Over to you, and I'll come back to say goodbye at the end, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary and Galerie Lelong, for this invitation, as well as Ivy Jones of Welancora Gallery for thinking of me. I am truly honored to be able to moderate today's conversation. To start, I'd like to create a framework for our conversation around the exhibition's title, Open Doors, and then insulate that with the open spaces of this dialogue. Over the duration of the time we have together today, I want us to consider how the works on view and more broadly the trajectories of the artist's practices can be treated as openings, invitations, departures, passageways, callings, conjurings, exits, or markers of possibilities as needed. Each artist will offer a brief slide presentation of their work, and then we'll return for a conversation. If you have questions over the course of our dialogue, please drop them into the chat and I'll pull from them at the end. And to introduce our artists, I'll be reading heavily abbreviated bios that will not do the achievements of this group justice in the order that the group will be presenting. So first, June Edmonds was born in 1959 in Los Angeles and earned her MFA from Tyler School of Art, Philadelphia, and BFA from San Diego State University. She also attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and earned a certificate in education from UCLA. Solo exhibitions include a 40-year retrospective exhibition, June Edmonds Full Spectrum, 2021 to 2022, organized and presented by Loyola Marymount University, Los Angeles, and a forthcoming solo exhibition at the Riverside Art Museum in Riverside, California, opening in September 2022. She is a recipient of the 2022 Guggenheim Fellowship and the Aware Prize at the Armory Show 2020 for Best Solo Booth Presentation by a Female Artist. Next, Carl E. Hazlewood was born in 1951 in Guyana, South America. He received a BFA with honors from Pratt Institute and an MA from Hunter College. Parallel to his studio practice, Hazlewood co-founded Algira, a center for contemporary art in Newark, New Jersey in 1983. Honors include fellowships and residencies from Headland Center for the Arts, Yaddo, Vermont Studio Center, and the MacDowell Colony. As a curator and writer, he is the associate editor of NKA, Journal of Contemporary African Art, and the Arts Journal, Critical Perspectives on Contemporary Literature, History, Art, and Culture of Guyana and the Caribbean. Helen Evans Ramsaran was born in Bryan, Texas in 1943. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in art education and an MFA in sculpture from Ohio State University. She moved to New York in 1973 and began teaching sculpture and ceramics at the City University of New York in 1974. Shortly thereafter, she created a series of bronze relief sculpture called Visual Tales. This is her only series that is autobiographical in its statement and assumes the form of a visual narrative. In the 1980s, Ramsaran's work took a major shift and developed into an exploration of ancient rituals, African oral traditions, myths, fossilized remains, supernatural power, and ancient African-inspired architecture. Ramsaran has exhibited extensively throughout the world with several international showings in Japan, Paris, and Johannesburg. And lastly, Chris Watts was born in High Point, North Carolina. He attended the MFA program at the Yale School of Art after graduating from the College of Arts and Architecture, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Academy of Fine Arts and Design, Wrocław, Poland. The artist has held various artist residencies, among the McCall Center for Art and Innovation, Charlotte, North Carolina, the Art and Law Fellowship Program at Cornell University, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Workspace Program. His work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and he is a featured artist in the documentary film, The Art of Making It. The film had its world premiere at the 2021 Hamptons International Film Festival. So June, let's begin.
Okay, I'll start over. Thank you so much, Mary at Galerie Lelong and the team at Galerie Lelong for inviting me to be in this wonderful exhibition and for your beautiful installation. And thank you, Daonne, as well for moderating. And this is the installation of works. There's one more piece sort of in the back wall. And this installation, I'm primarily focused on a shape that is something that I've been working with in the past 4 years, which is sort of that space where the two circles, which is a motif that I have been working with for almost a decade or over a decade, overlap. And that space is called the Vesica Pieces. And within that space where the two circles overlap, is supposed to be a very sacred area. It is a place where one can travel from the physical to the non-physical world. And you also in traditional art, Gothic art, art from ancient art as well, see that you might see a religious figure within that space. For instance, the Virgin of Guadalupe. And so this piece right here is sort of the first time where I've just focused on that shape by itself and sort of used it very literally as in this form of the vulva. And it was created like right after the president was inaugurated. And so I'm using the vulva, but in tones that are reminiscent of skin tones of African Americans in particular. I'm also using primary colors and moving those colors to brown. And so these are just different versions of that motif. And so in these pieces, I'm sort of thinking of movement and location. I'm thinking of actually women primarily, trailblazers and pioneers at different spaces in California. So we can keep on. And these last two, this one as well, I'm thinking of sort of these trailblazers that are in La Jolla, in Southern California, that's in the San Diego area. And a lot of these lines, though, I'm also inspired by African-American quilts, particularly the quilts of Rosie Lee Tompkins, who is from the Bay Area here in California. And her work was subject of a survey in Berkeley a couple years ago. And so some more of these shapes, and this piece was concerning another trailblazer in Los Angeles area, in the Beverly Hills area. The first woman to settle to be a settler of Beverly Hills was an Afro-Latina woman. And also sort of celebrating making place, or women's making place, by with the creativity that they had, that they brought with them, which is through gardening, so it's making home with love and these other domestic activities. Okay, and previously, or really sort of in conjunction, I'm sort of using the same palette of skin tone with a series of flags that I have done. So you'll see that there's different treatment of texture, of surface, and so these are really sort of full of sort of that thicker texture. And so there's one more of those. And so I'm just speaking, of course, of what it is to be American, and who really sort of owns the title of being American in these works.
So Carl, if you're ready to share.
Oh, sure. Oh, yes. This piece is called Blackhead Anansi Constellation. It is part of an ongoing series. Well, it became a series because I became obsessed with the idea of Anansi's web as a connecting tissue for people of the diaspora. And, I've been thinking a lot about that lately because of things that happened within my family personally, the connections and histories that are suddenly being revealed, and also how we are connected, not only from the Caribbean, where I was born, South America, but our connections in the wider world of not only Africa, but Europe and so on. My work is, I'm concerned about the formal aspect of the work as something that would last forever, but I'm also concerned about with the stories we tell ourselves, that drive an image towards meaning. A friend of mine long ago wrote about, made a statement. His name is Martin Carter. He's a great poet and politician from Guyana. He was imprisoned by the British when we were seeking independence and that sort of thing. He wrote about, he said, there was sort of a provocative observation. He said during a lecture on the nature of artist as victim and vehicle, he said, there's a pattern of psychological anarchy, which even now determines the shape of contemporary Caribbean, where the political leader and the Obeah man, that is a shaman, have much in common. Both seek shortcuts, the former through history, the latter through reality. I think I'm on the side of the shaman, seeking a way through reality, through poetry, through literature, towards something that would be new and would say something to us and to people in general. It's like my titles, most of my titles begin with Blackhead something, Blackhead and Nancy. The Blackhead is me. I'm within this structure in some way or form. And Anansi is the West African god of, he's a god. He was brought to the West along with the slaves. And, he's a trickster god. And it's a place where I think we find ourselves quite a bit, because in order to survive, we have to find ways to get through problems, and it might involve or what people call, being a trickster, or finding ways to go through knots of problems, as they occur, which is why I have the strings and so on. There's something about unknotting problems, so these things aren't all very specific, but it's part of the stories I tell myself as I produce these things. Of course, I want them to survive on their own when I'm not there. So, it's it drives, I think, it drives the poetry of the piece, which is what I'm always after. I'm not after, like the guy mentioned, politics. Politics is a necessary thing, but magic and poetry and how we use language and images are what's important to me. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. We're gonna come back because you're tapping on so many things I want us to unpack further. Helen, will you join us now?
Yes. Again, thank you very much for inviting me, both the gallery and to Daonne, for being a part of this. As you know, my career spans about almost 5 decades. So the pieces that you're seeing here in this show, I did they were actually the culmination of a series of works that I did because I wanted to sort of remember my childhood memories of Texas. And I started to think about this when I was about 4 years old. I was, just kind of playing around with things. When you dig down in the earth in Texas, you find clay, and that's when I discovered clay. But and I did a whole series of works before this, and these are actually the culmination of that. And I wanted to do these pieces because I wanted to remember what those visual tales were about. And also, I sort of knew that I was coming to the end of that. I was going on sabbatical, and this sabbatical was actually ending in Africa. I had started off in Italy to do some casting in the Founders there, and it was actually ending in Africa. But I was well primed, to go to Africa because I had heard all my life these stories about Africa. And when I got to school and graduate school and so forth, I met Africans who told me even more stories. And so I just sort of wanted to explore that, in my sculpture. So these are done in bronze, and mainly that's when I also learned that Africans worked in bronze, was back in school. And also I wanted to kind of debunk some myths. People always consider Africa to be a poor place, but I discovered in Ghana that these were they worked in gold, and did very exquisite work in gold and bronze and so forth. So that's this golden icon. The works that were done in bronze are, of course, very precious. And there were some other myths too, that Africa had no writing systems, And so I remembered when I was young too, I didn't have a writing system either. I would watch my older brothers and sisters, after dinner, gather at the dining room table to do their homework. But I was wondering what these things were that they were reading and writing and so forth. So I kind of invented my own language. I had no language for what I was doing out in the backyard. I just knew that I had seen a lot of things. The backyard was just full of things ideas that I could put into art or whatever it was I was doing. And so I did. You see plants and you see insects and you see leaves and you see all these things up close when you're only about 4 years old. And also you're here in Key to a Lost Dream. This is when I really began to think more about Africa and what I had always felt like we had lost. And keys are something that it opens things as well as closes things. And I always felt like this is something that I could open. And in a very short period of time, I began to open, what Africa had to offer. And I was really grateful that I took that trip. So I have Key to a Lost Dream, a golden icon, and the piece about Africa and a blue talisman, how these things kind of protected the African people and probably the American people too, African Americans as well. And so I was like primed to do this work. And also once I got to Africa, Africa did not disappoint me. The poverty there did not disappoint me so much that I didn't want to go back. In fact, I went back to Africa 7 or 8 more times, and I still go from time to time. I just have to have friends with me this time. I traveled in Africa mainly on my own, so I could absorb everything and come to a place, look at things, experience what it was like, and then leave when I wanted to, not when someone else decided. So that was my experience in Africa. Okay, that ends in my presentation.
Thank you, Helen. We're going to come back because memory feels so ripe for further exploration. So Chris, would you like to share with us now?
Yeah, for sure. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Helen. I love your work, by the way, but I feel like your past world and present world of kind of navigating and traveling holds so much importance, and it drips into your work. And I respond to that because I feel like I'm kind of the same way in a lot of aspects. And the body of work that is now in the gallery is an extension of a series titled "The Spirits That Lend Strength Are Invisible." And the body of work began on my return from a trip to Peru within recent months. I spent quite a bit of time there. While I was there, I was sharing, during my time there, I spent time with healers and shamans, and just kind of getting a better understanding of my own spirituality, but also the land itself. And I was able to obtain pigments from the region, gifted to me by these individuals. And these pigments are pulled from the earth, they're pulled from nature. And these pigments for Peruvians are held in much importance in regards to their textile design. If you're familiar with their ancestors dating back to the Inca, like wearing these garments, and shamans were all really like bright colors, and it's really potent and strong colorways. Upon coming back to the US, being regrounded, in kind of this heightened spirituality that I was in the moment, I kind of started my own reinvestigation of my Native American ancestors and their relationship to Africans, and how Native Americans and Africans predated a relationship, had a relationship predating the time of Columbus discovering the New World. And one of the stories that kind of I came across is a Native American story from Guyana that speaks on the Great Spirit, the Father Spirit, and other powers of the Americas had a meeting with Nyan, an African sky spirit. And during the meeting, the Great Spirit invited Nyan to share kind of their magical domains. And the African spirits agreed on condition that the Great Spirit in turn shared the distant kingdoms of America, thus the powers of Black Africans, have said to establish a close cooperative relationship with spirits, powers of the Americas. And the four works, or three of the four works, are kind of dedicated to that exchange, with one piece made with these pigments dedicated to Nyan, and the other the Great Spirit, which the piece that's on screen now is the meeting itself, which why a lot of the colors are more robust and bounded in their agreement.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I have so many questions that we don't have enough time to get to all of them. So we're going to dive right in. I have group questions, I have individual questions, but given the synergies that are happening across all of your sharing, I'm going to start with some group questions and then move into individual as it makes sense. So my first question is a March 31st, 2022 New York Times interview with artist Mel Edwards, the new ancestor Sam Gilliam, and William T. Williams explained they were bonded by a shared understanding of abstraction as a core principle of Black expressive culture with roots in Africa. How do each of you define abstraction? How do you find your way to how did you find your way to abstraction? And what does it provide you that more literal, figurative, representational methods cannot or do not? And anyone can answer as ready.
Well, I define abstraction as the ability to look at something perhaps in nature or outside of nature, like architecture or seeds or fossils and things like that, and begin to take away from it something that is important to you. So every now and then, my works have gravitated towards something that is visual and representational, but not totally. When I was a child, I worked from my own imagination, and to me, that's primary. That you work from your own imagination, and your imagination brings so much more to it. Krista spoke about the spirit world and so forth. So that's a part of a child's imagination too. It does not censure anything. Anything can go. So sometimes I have trees that come out of heads or bones that come out of the body, or things like that, or a spider. It looks like a spider in some areas. So this is the part that I've always wanted to get back to. And sometimes it loses all of that. And I go to generally what is called abstraction. And that's important to me because abstraction comes out of the imagination. And I was happy to hear what Sam Gilliam said about that. I met Sam back in Washington. I spent about 3 years living in that area. And I saw him at a show at the Studio Museum. He came to the exhibition. So I didn't know Sam well, but I knew the other two. I still know the other two. In fact, Mel was quite instrumental in getting me to a bronze casting foundry and doing that series of works that I have on display and have done from 78. I think I started that series in 78 and works right up until the end of 79 when I took off for Italy.
Thank you, Helen. Anyone else?
Well, I can talk a little more.
Carl, were you speaking?
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to mention that I was impressed that Carl went back to some of his roots and stories, visual stories about Nancy. I love that. And we in the South, we always had our Remus, you know.
Yes,
So,
we did.
yes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, Nancy, say he's a trickster, but that's the thing that runs through our African-American DNA, because we had to survive. We said things without saying things, you know. The masquerade that we held, that has become a tradition since slavery times. We could make fun of the masters by dressing up. They just thought we were being funny, but actually we were being funny at their expense. They had no clue, you know. And even now, when you want to say something, you almost have to be double-toned. You know, you could say things in one way and express, you know, you could speak to one audience in one way with the same image, if you wish, you know, and you find yourself using that poetic, faceted way of approaching things. And that becomes almost you could use an abstract image to do those kind of things. It has more uses than the very specific imagistic thing, which is just what you see is what you get. What I see is never, it's never quite what I get or what I give, you know? So, and I think I've been doing that since childhood as somebody who read a lot. I was homeschooled and it was all visual and literary and all by myself, you know, discovering things, you know. I discovered Turner and, you know, the British artists because I come from British, when I was born, it was a British colony. And so I understood things instinctively at that level, you know, that one had to communicate or to understand things in a very essential kind of way. And I think I'm still that way. I'm still that child, or I'm that child again with the new work. So so as a blackhead Nancy guy, I'm trying to spread that web in all various directions to retrieve an image that can communicate either visually, imagistically, or for those who could read it in a certain way. I communicate that way also. And I think that's basically what it's all about. You know, there's places where I focus on specific things sometimes. And there are other places where I want the image to be itself and to be so strong that it communicates on all sorts of levels to all sorts of people, you know? So it's simple, but it's complex. I remember making abstract work as a little kid. I made art that looked like adult work as a little kid, even though where I come from, there are no art galleries, no museums. I never saw any actual art until I went to America as a young kid. So, you know, it's part of my way of approaching life, you know, either literary in a literary way or an imagistic way. And as I say, you know, I did a lot of things, and I'm returning to my practice is a useful word here now again. So I guess I'm returning to a practice that I started at a very young age, you know, and it's all revelatory at this moment as we go along, as we proceed. So, so abstraction really has lots of ways to communicate for me. I remember as a child making abstractions, and people would ask me, what the hell is that? What is that? You know, but I love those colors, those forms, those lines, it communicated something to me. But when they would ask that stuff, as a 10-year-old, well, I couldn't explain what my attraction was, but I would say, oh, I'd scratch some figures in and say, oh, they're angels, it's heaven. And this is heaven, these are angels, So I'm still looking for angels, so.
Thank
I'm
you.
a bit envious. I feel like whenever I was a kid, I was drawing figurative objects or recognizable objects, but I found meditative space while staring at the sky or cloud watching or things that were more abstractly in the physical world. I was very much drawn to. And I don't think that I was in a space to dabble in abstraction, until you kind of tapped into it and you wanted more. And I think, abstraction can be so expansive. And when I say expansive, not in what it's capable of, but, how far you can get and what it does for you, the maker. It's kind of like knowing something, and now that you can't turn back and go back the way that you were working prior. It's kind of like, I have to go deeper, I have to go further. And making in a ritualistic sense, abstraction at least for me, it kind of creates the space for that to actually happen.
But I think of African art, we were talking about that in relationship. That was the question, as I understood, in relation to abstraction. So much of what we know about abstraction, sort of comes from understanding African work, African artwork, which in many ways is beyond art, right? They're pieces of spirituality, and then sort of symbols of spirituality, the symbols that are created, if you will, sort of evoke emotion, which is something that as an abstract artist, it's important to me as well. As you guys were speaking, I was thinking of a student, when I was teaching kids, and a child came in and didn't want to do anything, but just something was really bothering him. So I just gave him a small little piece of paper, and then teacher sort of scribbles out really the most beautiful thing, abstract piece of something that I've ever seen. And it also was describing what was going on with him as well. So I was sort of thinking about what Carl was saying, is sort of like those very first inclinations to do artwork is abstraction. There's so much freedom in it, right? And so much opportunity for discovery.
Thank you all. And so we're going to continue on that tangent as we think about looking skyward, as Chris was describing, and this potential of the possibility of what abstraction can offer. And so I'd like to share a quote from Zora Neale Hurston's text, The Sanctified Church. The truth is that the religious service is a conscious art expression. The artist is consciously creating, carefully choosing every syllable and every breath. The dialect breaks through only when the speaker has reached the emotional pitch where he loses all self-consciousness. And I'm thinking about this young student, June, that you're describing. In thinking about the poetics and references of your collective titles, which I was, for a time, I'm not gonna read all of them. I wrote a poem for the audience, just putting, well, I'll just do it. Blackhead Anansi Constellations, Key to a Lost Dream. The spirits that lend strength are invisible, 10, Nyan. Alpina de las Aguas, a blue talisman. Under the radar, the spirits that lend strength are invisible, 12, seated shaman. Blackhead Anansi, illusion forbidden fruit. Gilda closed her eyes, didn't share her dreams, but smiled. Blackhead Anansi, her slow dance. Joy of other suns, a golden icon. The spirits that lend strength are invisible. 11, Great Spirit. So then going back to that Zora Neale Hurston quote, the truth is that the religious service is a conscious art expression. The artist is consciously creating, carefully choosing every syllable and every breath. The dialect breaks through only when the speaker has reached the emotional pitch where he loses all self-consciousness. So when thinking about the poetics and references of your collective titles, I want to push beyond religion into the spiritual. So across all of the works on view, there is a calling, a channeling, a request to the ancestors, to spirits, to something mystical that is higher and greater beyond the visible, tangible earth. So what is it that pulls for you towards those spaces and entities through your respective practices?
Well, like Chris, as a kid, I also looked to the sky, where I was as a kid, they're palm trees and coconut trees and fruit trees. I was too ill to be running out there and playing in the outside with other kids or anything like that. But I could look and I could understand, and my readings of my understanding as a kid of spirituality. It's funny. One of the original things I thought. One of the things I thought about as a kid is that the Bible, and this goes to abstraction, and something out of nothing. The Bible says, God created man out of earth and so on. So my thought was that, since I didn't know any artists, or anybody did this thing, I thought, this is almost like being God. This is the next thing to this creative thing, this creating something out of nothing, these materials. When I go outside and I dig in the mud, because I'd read that clay, you can make things out of clay. So I made little heads while my mother was away, She would leave me with information. She would leave me with instructions. She says, I want to see something when I come back home. I want to see something written, a poem or a passage or something. And we will correct the mistakes later on. But I want to see something that's new, something that's from you. But don't go outside, don't get in trouble. But of course, I sneaked out to dig the mud and to bring it in. And she very carefully not noticed, though she knew. So, but the idea of spirituality, I always felt, there was something innately connected to the spiritual about this thing that I was doing, even at that age, 9, 10, whatever. And I understood that it was an expression of this spirit, creative spirit, if nothing else, and I tend to still feel that way. So,
like Carl and Chris, I also spent a lot of time looking at the sky. My early childhood was in Texas. And so in Texas, you have big sky. And I always also spent a lot of time in that kind of spiritual world, and that, I guess, is what has drawn me to Africa, is because all the time I spent in the spiritual world, and I never saw the spiritual world as having images. To me, that was always abstract, with the gold and the feelings, like Zora Neale Hurston says, it's the feelings. And when the preacher loses himself in it, I saw that as a child, and it still stuck with me. So I think that was what drew me to Africa and wanting to use that in my work.
Yeah, and speaking of feelings, for me, the spiritual connection was not really like on the outside. It sort of starts with me in the interior, and sort of shutting everything down and sort of listening to what's going on. I mean, we're talking about sort of the creative process and sort of finding sort of this something out of nothing, as we were talking about earlier. So really just sort of starting sort of in the interior and sort of being at a place of just paying attention and listening.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to add anything else?
I mean, they touched on almost everything, like I think paying attention and listening in those moments, whether you consider yourself making work about the spiritual with the work that we do, we kind of, Black people always kind of have our ancestors by our sides all the time. So, I think it's always depending on what vibration or what frequency we're kind of operating on at that time, we're kind of tuned in all the time while working. So innately, I think abstraction work exists as so.
Thank you.
I just want to mention one more thing while we're on this topic of the spiritual.
Yes.
And that is that I grew up in a very maternal, background. Even though there were men in my families, I always identified with the women, and that drew me closer to the spiritual world too, because women were always singing and moaning and that sort of thing. And you sort of knew that they were in their own world, in their own zone. So I still, I still relate to that. So in my work, you see a lot of women with these, you see a lot of breast shapes, and that's because everybody had these little kids, and they were always either praying over them or, feeding them or something. And that kind of drew me to Africa too. I saw a lot of that, in Africa.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to move to audience questions because people got things to say, got things to ask. And so I'm just going to continue on the thread that we're going, because this feels really, I'm feeling really fed by this conversation, because I think these are thoughts and questions that I've been having in navigating my own practice, but then also thinking about this current moment that we're navigating, and this importance of returning back to roots and to childhood as a starting point to figure out what went wrong, but also to reaffirm our whys of being. So I'm going to quote from Richard Wright. "I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil, to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom." And so that was the inspiration for Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns. And that was also an inspiration for June's series. So I've been thinking a lot about how one's point of origin, immediate or ancestral, shapes one's ways of looking, engaging, and relating to place, space, identity, to beauty. I think you're all you've been touching on that. And so in knowing that, we have representation from Guyana, from North Carolina, from California, from Texas, within this group, we can chart the Great Migration and the African diaspora. And so I'm curious, for those who have left, however we define that home, in what ways has your practice been a means of staying connected or developing a connection? And for those who have remained or who seek to return, what pulls you to remain? And does regionalism influence your approach to art making and specifically to abstraction?
The answer is yes. And I'm very intrigued by this group and how the answer is yes to them, whether it is, but I feel that it is. And so I think sort of understanding your environment is such a part of survivalism. It's as African Americans, we have really needed to understand where we are, right? And that had everything to do with our lives. And so with that first wave of I don't know why I'm going blank, but migration, that first wave was about sort of finding this land of safety and security and proper livelihood. And so even, many of us have gone to different residencies and so temporary movements and stays at places. And it's just interesting to me when I think back on that, how important it is to sort of understand that place that I might even just be visiting. And so, yes, in the work that I do now, it's very related to California. I did a residency in Kentucky. It was very important for me to understand what was going on there and excavate some history that was going on there, so, and then interpret it, of course, abstractly, through symbolism, through emotion and color and texture and line.
It's funny. It's all these things are so. There's this web again. I was in Italy. It's a residency, Borgioso, and I was right on the coast, looking at the Mediterranean, and I'm looking every day at this gorgeous sea. And you go into the city, and there are you go into these old houses, and there's gold. The wall is gold, the ceiling is gold, everything is gold. And how did gold get there? Where did it come from? But in looking at the sea, for a while I thought, what place do I have? What do I belong here? Why am I here? And then, but as I thought more clearly, I said, yeah, there are people. I mean, Africa's right across the ocean, the Mediterranean, and even at this moment, people are, they're sinking. They're floating, sinking, dying, whatever, to get somewhere else because of whatever problems they have at that moment, and I've been telling people about I did my ancestry thing because my sister asked me to do it. So, and it was very revelatory again, because at that seat, one of my ancestors on the other side actually was from Sardinia. And Sardinia was right off the coast. Sardinia is an island right off the coast of Italy. They're not Italians, but they have a very interesting, rich history. And this web thing is about people moving and interconnecting over a wide range of time and history and so on. I keep saying the slavery thing is recent, and it's a moment, and it's effective for people who live now, but it's a moment. There's all sorts of other interconnecting experiences that we are the result of. We are the successful result of, or else we wouldn't be here. And in a way, I find that presents lots of possibilities for people like us in the West, because all those strains of history and time and so on are real by blood, So we're Africans, and there's lots of rich history there and experiences, and our complex experience here of blood and love and terror and excitement and success and all these things, which makes the stuff we do as poets and writers and artists, there's so much rich possibilities to draw from, and that moving about that you mentioned, I was born in Guyana, South America. I went to Texas, I lived in Texas as a kid, Houston, Texas, that's where I got my heart surgery. And I'm here, I moved there. I have family who live in Japan and England and Europe and Africa and all over, So there is all these different lines, simultaneous lines that are available to us, but we have to see it and acknowledge it and draw from it, So there, I came across I've I've quoted a poem by the same guy I talked about before, Martin Carter, who was imprisoned in Guyana when he was fighting for independence and, you know, and so on. But he was this poet. He wrote this thing. Maybe I can read it quickly.
Quickly, give us a taste. And then we're gonna.
I was wondering if I could shape the passion just as I wanted in solid fire. I was wondering if the strange combustion of my days, the tension of the world inside of me, and the strength of my heart were enough. I was wondering if I could stand as tall while the tide of the sea rose and fell, if the sky could recede as I went, or the earth would emerge as I came to the door of the morning locked against the sun. I was wondering if I could make myself nothing but fire, pure and incorruptible, if the wound of the wind in my face would be healed by the work of my life, or the growth of the pain in my sleep would be stopped in the strife of my days. I was wondering if the agony of the years could be traced to the seed of an hour, if the roots that spread out in the swamp, if the roots ran too deep for the issuing flower. I was wondering if I could find myself, all that I am in all I could be, if all the populations of stars would be less than the things that I could utter, and the challenge of the space in my soul be filled by the shape I become. So, you know, that's all about the doubt and hope and passion, you know, that an individual goes through as you know, as they try to transcend the here and now, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thank you, Carl. Whew. I feel like I took my breath. I'm mindful of time.
yeah,
Please
so.
give us a shout if we can ask a few audience questions, but I would love for Chris and Helen, if you want to just.
Well, I go back to Richard taking that seed from the South and going north. And when my family moved north, they moved to Ohio. And so that was where I met many Africans who had played such a significant role in my life. They told me their stories, and we often talked about nature and so forth and so on. And I realized how important nature was to them. And yet from there, I came to New York, and I've never felt so much at home as I have been in New York, you know? So I think we have many homes, you know? And when I go off to Africa, I feel right at home there as well, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I out of all the places I've lived and traveled and done residencies, like, you can put me anywhere in the world and I'll thrive, I feel. But there's a certain type of feeling with coming back to the South, that like my soul is being fed in a really specific way that no other place can do. And I've been in New York myself for 10 years. I consider it home. And when I left, I never thought I would be in a place where I'd be so anxious and feel such a calling to kind of spend more time in the South. I'm here now in North Carolina. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to respond to that. And I don't think, if you're aware and sensitive to those push and pulls, yeah, home can be anywhere. But I do feel like whenever you're in certain places, talking with certain people, having certain foods, hear a certain laugh in a certain part of the belly, like, it feels a little bit more home than another place, you know?
There's a question for Chris in the chat that would be real interesting to hear about.
Let's do it. Okay, let me pull that up. Chris, please share with us more about your experience in Peru and how it will impact your practice going forward. That question? Was that the? Let's see. Yes. Yes. Peru.
Is that the question?
So yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Peru, like the South, I felt a really specific vibration that felt it was just a really high energy. It's hard to explain, but it almost sometimes feels like the earth is kind of communicating with me in certain ways. I remember finding some old terraces, ancient terraces built by the Inca, and this was kind of like off a hike. And I remember being there, and I was there with a few friends, kind of just in complete awe of this thing. And I felt like I was almost crossing a boundary or a territory. And I was just like, I think we've enjoyed our stay. It's time for us to go. I feel like someone is just kind of like, this is like a sacred place. And yeah, Peru in the Sacred Valley is just a really magical place. A lot of the people that I met there, hold that high energy. And how would that influence my work in the future? I think it's already influencing my work because it's allowing me to kind of tap into a certain vibration, which even like me being able to bring that back home to North America, just kind of some of the conversations that I'm having and the things that I'm interested in are completely different. And that's what travel does to you, going to a certain place and allowing yourself to kind of really soak your surroundings around you and kind of like softly root. But yeah, I think that's what experience is supposed to do to you. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I thought it was a good one. I went to Dakar. I went to Africa for the first time, a month ago. And it was amazing. It was so overwhelming. But I wouldn't say I thought I felt this big spiritual thing go on. And I'm pretty sensitive to that. But interestingly, since I've been back, there's not a day that I haven't thought about Dakar. I'm seeing things appear in my work that I know is a response to that experience. So these things happen on this subconscious level for sure as well.
Thank you. So June, I'm going to ask you a question now. So this is from Melania. And so this was their first introduction to your work, and they're really drawn to the flag series. And so could you share a bit more about the poetics of your practice that allow you to translate racial and gender justice issues experienced by ancestors into unique shapes and colors? And what kind of power would you say these flags possess? And that's making me think about that Sam Gilliam quote that I shared with you. Well, I didn't share with the audience, but I shared with you earlier about this power of the abstraction to be a form of politic, of abstract art as political.
Yeah, the quote that, I don't know if you shared it out loud, but we read that quote, I thought was real interesting, where it's sort of like this general quote, but I thought it was a real directed statement where I'm going to surprise you that you could actually understand abstract work from artists of color and from unexpected places. That's sort of how I saw that statement. But the question about the flag, it is related to place. We were talking about sort of migrations and where we might end up. And so I was in Kentucky, and I'm not from the South. I was born in LA, even though my parents are from the East Coast. But I was in the South, and I was very concerned about being in the South, just from maybe stereotypes that I have in my mind of what happens in the South. But I know we had a new president, and I didn't think I didn't feel like I would really know if I would even be safe where I was. And in fact, I was, like I said, I was in a place called Paducah, Kentucky. Alonzo Davis has a residency there. And I wanted to go to Memphis, Tennessee, which is about 3 hours away, and drove there. And so all saw these Confederate flags, which we don't see so much here in Los Angeles, like on the trucks and all this. And on one of the highways, there was a big, giant Confederate flag, you know, on the top of a hill next to this house. And that evidently sort of impacted me because, you know, months later, I'm sort of having a dream of, and speaking of Sam Gilliam, of these flags that were very much like sort of these draped pieces that were all Black that I understood as flags. And so the idea did really come from the dreams. And I was using a particular palette at that time. I was saying I was using these primary colors and primary colors to skin tone. You know, the flag is red, white, and blue. Primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. So it seemed to come together. And sort of the reason why I'm choosing these primary colors is that I think that in our own vernacular, it's very interesting how we use primary colors to even describe our own skin tones, you know, so think about that. And so I just wanted to, it's like when you see certain people with the flag on their lapel, it's almost, it almost might as well be a Confederate flag. So how can I do sort of the opposite thing with the American flag, where you're like, huh, this flag is standing for something a little bit different than we're seeing. So that's sort of where that idea starts.
Thank you. So mindful of time, and I would love for Mary to come back and do final farewells, but I just want to personally thank all of you, June, Carl, Helen, and Chris, for sharing such a rich experience and space with us. And I'm just mindful of thinking about the Sankofa as we move forward, this necessity of looking back, but looking specifically back to childhood and our purest, truest selves, and what that can teach and offer us to like actually have the tools to move forward. So I thank you. Thank you all.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you all. So on behalf of all of our speakers and our amazing moderator, who brought us in a very full circle of history, spirituality, culture, and towards the future, thank you for joining us for Galerie Lelong Dialogues. This conversation has been recorded and it will be uploaded to our website, where you can also find some past conversations. So you can visit our website, www.galerielelong.com, or follow us on Instagram at Galerie Lelong for more information. I would also like to thank Grace Hahn for having organized us all so beautifully. Thank you, Grace. The show is ongoing through August 5th. We are open Monday to Friday, 10 to 6 p.m. And I do hope that our dear audience, if you haven't been to see the show, you will come and visit. And thank you to the artists. Thank you to our collaborators, Ivy Jones at Welancora, and to Luis de Jesus. And thank you, dear audience, for being here. Have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.